Hey, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Mike in San Francisco. Just quickly doing a sound check. Can everybody hear okay? You can all add to the chat box if you can hear nice and clearly. I'm going to hand over speaking responsibilities to my colleagues, Jess and Cheyenne. Um, Sounds like audio is good, so we're good to go. Over to you, Jess and Cheyenne. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Mike, for the handoff. I'd love to do another quick check just to make sure that my audio is also okay. Okay, good. Thank you, everyone. And also, can you just double check that you can see my screen? Should have done that all in one. Wonderful. All right, as Mike usually does, shall we start the call in about 3 minutes? Just an update that today's agenda is about your questions, really. I hope you brought them. I'll go through a couple overview questions that I thought would be most common, but then we'll open it up to question and answer. So maybe hold tight for 2 more minutes while we wait for others to join, and then we'll get started. Thank you again for joining. I'm very excited to see the turnout for this webinar, this off-week webinar. So thanks for spending multiple weeks in a row with us. So I'm Jess Solentano. I think most of you know me by now. I know several of you by name and by face and by all the amazing work that you're doing. Some names are new to me, so please feel free if you speak up to introduce yourself. It's really nice to get to know additional members of the Stripe community. Our call today is really geared towards answering your questions about the data that we have available for you and for your teams. So what I've done, and I'll move to the outline, is just tried to give us a little bit of structure to head off a couple of common questions that I think will come up from those of you that are considering working with the data that you have available. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. I have a couple questions in mind for my colleagues, Mike and Cheyenne, who are on the line, since they have worked with the data a bit, both quantitative and qualitatively. But we really want to make sure that we open this up for you all and to get the most out of your time this hour. So without further ado, let me continue on. So the objective of this call is to move from this image on the left where you see a brain overloaded with input to the image on the right, which is a serene brain, kind of knowing the inputs and being able to work with the different elements that you have at your fingertips. I know that it is a transition for many to have, an Excel spreadsheet that has many different codes and many different inputs and be able to work with that. And so I think we just want to make sure that this is the start of the journey to a more serene place with your data, but also to make sure that first and foremost that we're at hand for you to be helpful to you on this journey. We know that you all work with very complicated data sets. This is probably the least of the complicated data sets that you all work with, but just in case that this is unfamiliar to some of you, we're very happy to be your partners in moving from the left to the right here. So some common questions that I thought we could start off with. First of all, what data are available to my team? So in terms of the raw data set, we've collected across sites. If you are a site that has engaged in electronic data collection, we have collected over 2,500 pre and post tests across sites. And the modules of the data that we've collected are the required predominantly. So that's 1, 3, 4, and 17. And those are the data that we're looking at across sites to generate knowledge scores, confidence scores, and feedback on facilitation and on learner satisfaction, kind of general feedback about the modules themselves. So if you've been through the pre and the post test, you kind of know the sequence. It's multiple choice questions to assess knowledge, Likert-Scale questions to assess confidence, and in the post test, some evaluation questions on facilitation and on module satisfaction. So that's the data set that is available. The data set is de-identified per the stipulations of our IRB. We have coding that we have for each of the responses, and the data that you all have access to is a matched pre and post. So you don't have to do the coding of the pre and the post to see the responses across individual. That's already been done for you and deduplicated and cleaned to the extent that we can to make it more user-friendly for you and your team. This data set is inclusive of quantitative and qualitative data. By quantitative, this obviously means the scoring from the multiple choice and the Likert scale. And then the qualitative is, the short answer text questions that our learners submitted as part of their pre and post tests. Some of them are more verbose than others. Some of them are just lines, but that's the fields that can be used to generate the qualitative analysis. Another option, if the raw data set is too much, which in some cases it may be, is the monitoring reports, which we're sending out to you all with your most recently with your February template. We send the overall report across site that's not broken down by school, and then your partner report, so your specific school report. And the idea is that you can look at the knowledge scores and the confidence scores that your school is getting in comparison to the overall report. And just for some visuals for those of you that have not requested these data, when you do request the data, the raw data set, my colleague Cheyenne, huge shout out to Cheyenne for being the one who has coded this and made it more user friendly. So thank you, Cheyenne, for your effort on this. Cheyenne on the first page of the Excel spreadsheet has gone through and kind of provided a guide to the different question types and the different scoring options and what the meaning is. And then on the second page, this is just a screenshot of one of the data sets. It goes through what each of the questions is and then the scoring. So if you compare in the using your pre and post test, you can see what the questions are, and then you can see by individual what the answers were and how they scored the Likert scale. I'm just going to pause really quickly to make sure that everyone can hear me. Okay, great. So then monitoring report. Yes, please, Shan, please jump in.
Yeah, no, thanks for going over that, and thanks for the shout out. Just to add, I think that when people are looking at the Excel spreadsheet, if they want to have the paper pre and post test up, so if you can go back one slide.
Yes.
So for example, if you're looking at like M121, which you can see matches to pre-test module 1, Likert question 1, just go back to the paper test and see what that actual question was.
Definitely. Thank you for chiming in, Shan. That's very helpful. And can I request that others go on mute just because we have some background noise? Wonderful. Thank you for that. So definitely using the pre and the post test, the paper-based as a guide will help kind of identify which questions you're interested in or be able to help you go through the raw data set. And again, I hope that in addition to your questions, if there are things that would make your life easier, you're jotting those down too, because as you all know, this is a work in progress, and we're very much open to improvements in helping you interpret and use your data. So just back to the monitoring report, what we have tried to do for our partners and haven't received much feedback about this, so really open to hearing your feedback, is take the raw data set and break it down into the analyses that we think will be most useful for you all without you having to do the analysis yourself. So some things to bring your attention to are the summary pages on I think it's the second and the third page of the monitoring report. It's broken down by knowledge score, so you can see by module the pre and the post tests, as well as the improvement score. So I think that would probably be the first thing that I would do with the raw data set. You can save yourself some time, look at the monitoring report. And then also in a very high level way, we've looked at the pre and the post test confidence scores. And again, you can look to see in the legend, like how the improvement is. So like from 3 to 3.6, from 3.1 to 3.6, you can look at, I think the real beauty of the monitoring report is you can start to ask questions, and then you can cross-reference your raw data set and start to like look to see how this is being generated. So it should be seen as an additional tool. It's not the be all end all. We know that there are more questions that will come out of the monitoring report, but we hope that it's an easy entryway into looking at your data. And I've been sending that to partners no matter whether or not they've actually requested the raw data set. So hopefully that's helpful. Some other common questions. How do I gain access to data? We are asking that the PI or the PD of the school request it from Stripe. Again, we know that this project for each of you is still in the field, and so the data set grows by week. We understand that it's hard to keep getting input, so we kind of look to you to decide when it would be helpful to get the data set, and then if you need, you have a training the next weekend and you want another set, you're more than welcome to request that from us. We're running the monitoring reports on a weekly basis, so we have the updated monitoring reports available for you upon request, if that would be helpful. Again, going back to the first image, we don't want to overwhelm people with data and with all the emails that we send. So we really look to you to make those requests of us when it's most convenient. If you're not a PI or PD, we just ask that your request comes from the PI or PD or with the approval, because these data kind of lie in the hands of that team. We want to make sure, if others are trying to use it, that it's coming through a streamlined process from the leadership at the institution. What data issues should I be aware of? This is an important one, and our colleagues, a shout out to our colleagues at Makerere for identifying this early on. It's something that we had been working on, but as soon as they saw their raw data set, they got right back in touch with us and said, hey, something fishy is going on here. So let me just briefly explain the gender and clinic site. I think in the first couple weeks of implementation, there was a bug in that particular cell. I don't have quite the vocabulary to be able to explain this the way that our informatics team does, but I do know the effect was essentially that gender for some females was switching to other, so it looked like a disproportionate number of our learners were selecting other gender when that was not truly their selection, and that was throwing off our numbers. Similarly with clinic site, either people were not selecting it and it was coming back as an empty cell, or there was an issue where they were selecting it and it wasn't saving in our database. Our remedy is in process, and this is something that I'm very encouraged by. You know, when we see an issue, we've been able to kind of come back and be able to remedy it. When we're sending out the certificates to all of the learners, we are asking them to confirm their profile. And at this point, they confirm their gender and their clinic site. We've had about 800 learners respond to this process. It is an additional step for them, which we're sorry about, but it does allow for them to access their certificate. So I think there's an incentive there for them to work with us on that. And so the most recent data set does not have the corrected gender and clinic site in it, but this week's should be a merge where the corrected gender and clinic site is reflected. In some cases, clinic site is still an empty cell, and we're working on that, but I think it has been fixed. So moving forward, it's not no longer an issue. The last thing, and then I will promise that I will pause, since we said this was going to be a question and answer. I will step back for your questions. But the last one is, can I get access to identifiable data? Unfortunately, we are not able to share identifiable data per the stipulation of our IRB. We have worked with the Makerere team to make sure that their data is correct by kind of doing a stepwise process of giving them identifiers with some of the demographic information. They cross-reference that with their training logs, and then we're re-importing any changes and then sending them their de-identified data. But based on this process, it sounds a little bit complicated, but you know, I think that the point is that we're willing to work with you to make sure you have what you need. Unfortunately, we have to stick to the stipulations of our IRB and also to the consent form for our learners, where we assured our learners that their information would not be identifiable to them. So that was what I prepared in terms of what I anticipated to be the top line questions. I'm going to pause now and welcome Cheyenne and Mike to take questions with me. And if there is any pause in people generating their questions and speaking up, maybe we could just talk about the analyses that you all have done to kind of get people excited about what's possible. So please send your questions via chat, or feel free to, let's start with chat, and then we can always clarify any of your questions.
And this is Mike here, just jumping in. I see there's a question from Agnes, which LT has kindly answered, about the abstracts for AfriHealth. You know, clearly one of our goals with sharing this data with you is that you can review it, analyze it, and assess whether there are questions there that you want to answer and submit as an abstract to AfriHealth. The guidance is in the URL link that Elsie sent through in the chat box, so you know, follow through on that link to get that information. But in brief, the abstract is required to be 300 words, and in English, and there are specific details around the outline that are suggested in the guidance that Elsie sent through. In a recent Stripe circular, I also sent through a proposed structure for Stripe abstracts, which really speaks to, you know, questions that are related to educational evaluation that you may choose to use, but there is no compulsion that you use that. And one last thing, as we're encouraging early career investigators and students to submit abstracts with support from you all, we are very interested in supporting travel scholarships for 3 excellent abstracts, and so would encourage you to share that potential opportunity with your colleagues as you think about sharing your data at AfriHealth Symposium. Thanks.
Jess, there's a question from
Hafi.
Hafi.
I see it. So Hafi, this is a great question, and one that I think will require digging into your specific data set a little bit, and maybe even in conversation with Suzanne. I think that there was an issue where some of the post tests were going to have to be entered in manually. And so my first question is back to you to confirm that the post tests were entered manually. And please feel free to take yourself off mute. I don't need to speak to you via chat. But I would just say that when you do check and you confirm that the post tests were entered manually, that we just stay in conversation to assure that we look into this issue. The thing that's coming to mind right now is if the learners did their pre-test electronically and then they did their post-test manually, the matching process using their email, if there's any issue with their printed email, we could have had an issue in the matching process. And then if we're ever not able to match, it's kind of just like, that data set is not included. So we should really look into this. First step being to make sure that it's entered. Second step, making sure that there's not an issue with the matching process. So let's just be in conversation about that to make sure you have the data available to you.
Jess, I just got a question sent through to me privately, but I think you can answer it for everybody. Where do schools get the monitoring data from?
How do they request that, I'm guessing?
Exactly.
Please just email the Stripe and we can send it out as soon as we get that request. And as I mentioned, we're running the reports on a weekly basis. So feel free to request it as frequently as on a weekly basis. I have a question for Shan while we're waiting for additional questions. Shan, you did some qualitative coding on one of the reflection responses, and that was what you were able to pull together for one of the abstracts. I'm wondering if you could just talk us through that process and how you did it at a high level. Feel free. I know it was time consuming, a lot of coding, but for others that might be interested in doing qualitative analysis, can you just give us a quick explanation of how you went about it and how you'd suggest others might do the same?
Sure. So at the end of the required questions, there's 3 really great reflection questions. One was on incorporating interprofessional collaboration, and that was the question that I focused on. Another question on incorporating quality improvement into their workplace, and then a third question on how the Stripe HIV training affected, how they think the training will affect the care of their patients with HIV or risk for HIV in their workplace. And this is where I think there's a lot of potential for qualitative abstracts. And so I looked at about 600 responses at the time, it was data through December, for how trainees expected to incorporate interprofessional collaboration at their workplace. And just in the Excel document that people are receiving, I translated the qualitative responses into briefer descriptions or meaning, and then I coded those descriptions into about 10 or less themes. It really came out. There were some commonalities in how people responded and how they were going to incorporate the interprofessional collaboration, and it matched back to the interprofessional objectives of Stripe, which was really great to see. And so I was seeing that the interprofessional objectives were being taught and being carried through to trainees' plans. But I think for anyone interested in doing qualitative abstract or mixed methods, looking at the final reflection questions will be valuable.
Thanks.
The other qualitative responses are at the end of the modules. There is a question on evaluating facilitation and on evaluating the module, and it's free-form responses. But I'm finding that those responses are more helpful for if programs are to do Stripe again and what they might want to do differently or the same. And I haven't found so far that those would be more like research questions, but I would encourage everyone to dig deeper.
Great, thanks, Cheyenne. I just wanted to add to the call some consideration around, how we should be using this data. I mentioned earlier the potential opportunity that the AfriHealth meeting affords us. The other thing that I really would encourage all schools to think about is how this data can be leveraged to, strengthen our case for further funding from the U.S. government and other sources. And so I think one key thing to consider when interrogating your data is how has this endeavor been successful? And let me just give you sort of one perspective, which is the perspective of our funder, who is really interested in seeing how our trainings advances clinical outcomes at PEPFAR supported sites. I think everybody on the call recognizes that we simply can't draw a direct line between the Stripe endeavor and clinical outcomes, but I think some of the things that we could look at, and I would encourage you to consider this as you receive and interrogate your data, is that where are the learners learning? Are they learning at PEPFAR supported sites? And that's something that we know is of high priority to the funder. So linking the learners to the sites, and then asking questions around how this is changing the attitudes and perspectives of the learners around issues that are critical to PEPFAR, in terms of leveraging data to improve quality of care for people living with HIV. And so, given that there is a real focus in the Stripe learning around quality improvement, I think one of the things to consider is how is this data, or how is this project leading to students and early career learners engaging in quality improvement activities more enthusiastically or more readily because they've taken part in the training. So these are just a couple of things to think about through the lens of how do we secure year 2 funding. And I would encourage all of you to be thinking about that. As we think about the AfriHealth Symposium, I'm sure many of you are already percolating on interesting questions. I mean, I think some of the things that are really interesting to AfriHealth, and I encourage Elsie to weigh in if she has any thoughts here, but how has Stripe catalyzed new innovation in curriculum development at your institution, or how has Stripe led to new engagement of different partners or different interprofessional relationships amongst faculty and learners at your institution? And this brings me back to Cheyenne's comments around looking at the qualitative data, which is rich with insights that can kind of help answer these questions. I think the other kind of abstract that is potentially very compelling to AfriHealth are, our impact assessment. So how many trainers have trained across your sites? What is the mix of learners that are attending trainings, and both in terms of professional cadres, ages, sorry, not ages, career development in terms of pre-service, post-service, and then geographic location. And I think some of those impact assessments will be interesting to AfriHealth. And then finally, I think sort of a forward-looking perspective is, where do you see Stripe leading to new innovation at your site, or how can you disseminate this approach to learning and to interprofessional HIV training within your country or at sites affiliated with your institution? So these are some of the questions that you might want to ask. As I say, I encourage all the PIs or PDs on the phone to really be thinking through the lens of what is going to provide the most compelling data to future funders. But all of us, as we think about AfriHealth, can be thinking about sort of scholarly opportunities to use this data. Over to you, Jess.
Great. Thanks, Mike. That's very helpful. I want to make sure that we keep offering the opportunity for questions, but not belabor it if you all don't have questions in this moment. I do think that requesting these data, looking at them, and kind of considering the different analyses that you want to be doing will bring up a lot of questions for you, as it has for us. So maybe I could just start talking about some next steps and some takeaways. But if you have a question that comes up, don't hesitate. We will wrap up when all the questions are answered. So I think just some high-level takeaways. I think we'd be very eager to set up sidebar conversations to talk about the quantitative and qualitative analyses that you all are doing. We can use the off weeks of the webinars to do this if this is a convenient time. I also want to recognize that we have so much expertise within the community. If you are finding that you're seeing something interesting in your data, or you have expertise in qualitative and quantitative analyses, please suggest hosting a webinar. We want to make sure that everyone's thoughts and expertise are brought to bear here. I think that will be the most benefit to Stripe. So that's a welcome, and we really encourage it. Also, please feel free to ask about a one-on-one session. As Hafi mentioned, there are bound to be issues that are specific to each site, and we're very much happy to sit down and try to look into what's going on and troubleshoot that with you. Or if you get the raw data, it's overwhelming and you don't quite understand how to use it, and you think a conversation would be helpful, that is very much an option for you. And then I do think as you're moving through your analysis, just making sure that you're sharing what you're seeing, and sharing your plans, your abstracts, any manuscripts, having a sense of how people are using this information will benefit the whole team, and really is something that we want to bring back to the group. So as you move towards using this information, just be reminded to loop back and let us know. And also, if you're curious how we're using kind of high level information in like infographics and summaries, all of that is available to you, and something that we can like replicate across site as you're going into conversations about your program. We'd love to make sure that you have the information that you need and in a presentation format that you need it. So again, these are just some things that we want to make sure you have available to you. So I don't see any more questions.
May I say something?
Oh, please, of course. Elsie, I recognize your voice, I believe.
Thank you. Yeah, so just about AfriHealth, the symposium, the abstracts from Stripe stand a very high chance of being accepted, because it really fits nearly through all of course, the theme, which is social justice and equity for health in Africa. But if you look at the sub-themes, it fits nearly all through those sub-themes. And so they are very likely to be accepted. So please, I'm imploring you to send in abstracts so that we can showcase this work. And there's a lot of interest in Stripe at least at the leadership level for AfriHealth. We had a governing council meeting recently, and people showed a lot of interest in this work. So we are looking forward to getting your abstracts and being able to showcase this work at the symposium. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike and Shan, any final comments from either of you?
Yeah, thanks, Elsie. Thanks, Jess. Another couple of questions that come through to me, which I'll share with the group. It's encouraging to hear that there are several of you that are preparing abstracts. So thanks for letting me know that. I'm excited to hear about those. And for those of you that are still unclear about how to access your monitoring data, the simplest thing to do is send an email to us at stripehiv@ucsf.edu. You'll see that email address in the chat box in a second, and you can and we can share that data, that monitoring data, with you if you've not yet received it. To be clear, the way that we're releasing that data is to the principal investigator or the program director at your institution. So we're not releasing that monitoring data to everybody, but if you're not the PI or the PD at your institution, reach out to them and ask them to send an email to stripehiv@ucsf.edu. So just wanted to clarify that point, and yeah, we're excited to work with you on this next stage of the project.
And just to echo something that Jess was saying, as soon as you get your data, please open it and review it for anything that looks to us immediately, especially with the app. Oh, I guess there's still some time. I thought that was February 25th. It will still be helpful to get back to us immediately so that we can sort any issues out.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Jess and Cheyenne. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This webinar, like all others, is recorded, and so will be posted on the Stripe website in due course. Feel free to send any further questions to us at stripehiv@ucsf.edu. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Usually I love to.